Hello and welcome to No Rest for the Weekend, where we go behind the scenes and talk to the creators of independent entertainment. I'm Jason Godbey, and if you've been following us on our website and social media, you know that we started reviewing films in 2019, and I want to take this episode as an opportunity to look back at 2019 and talk about some of the films that we reviewed. And to do that with me is No Rest for the Weekend contributor and my good friend, EJ Argenio. Welcome back, EJ.
Hey, Jason. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, man. So we last time you were here, we talked about the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival.
Yes, sir.
And some of the films that we saw there. And now it's going to be a little bit more mainstream of the conversation. So I also wanted to stipulate that the movies that we're going to discuss are all movies that have been in some sort of wide release. So if you've been on the show or if you've seen the show, we've talked about a film that is not released yet, i.e. just in film festivals. We're not going to talk about those. We're going to talk about stuff that people can actually find and watch. So this is going to be an episode for film fans as well as filmmakers. All right, so I figure we talk about our favorite films of 2019, or like our top 5 favorites kind of thing.
In no particular order.
No order kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
we're not ranking them. I don't give letter grades. I don't number grades to anything.
This is an authoritarian
it's just like
leadership.
These are
dictatorship.
movies that we saw that we like that we can recommend.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. All right, so we'll start with you. What's your number 5, so to speak?
Well, number 5, so to speak, I'd start with the Netflix vehicle Dolomite Is My Name, starring Eddie Murphy. This film caught me off guard because when I watched the trailer, I was expecting more of an autobiographical, which it was, but an autobiographical film with a lot of hardships and obstacles a performer in the 70s had to deal with, becoming a historical version of the Instagram model, if you will, somebody who's trying everything so he can find his slice of fame, and it ended up doing a lot more. I saw it to be a much more of a character film. I found it extremely entertaining while informative of not only the time, but the person that Eddie Murphy was playing, the person behind Dolomite. I thought the acting was superb. For a movie to be that entertaining and informative at the same time, I was pleasantly surprised and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a great style. I really liked it. So Eddie Murphy plays Rudy Ray Moore, who created the character Dolomite, and he was sort of a central figure of the blaxploitation movement in film in the 70s. Eddie Murphy doesn't look anything like Rudy Ray Moore, but he really captured the spirit of him, and it's written by the same guys who wrote Ed Wood, and very much in the spirit of that, where if you watch Ed Wood, you learn about Ed Wood, but there's not a lot of reality there. Like it's done with this sort of magical whimsy kind of thing, whereas this had more of a straight comedy vibe to it.
Yes.
And it's almost in the style of a blaxploitation comedy, which is the style that he made.
And the irony is, a film like Ed Wood was to show how a serious filmmaker was being perceived as comical in that time. And while there has been awards consideration for Dolomite, it's funny that you bring up Ed Wood because that won Martin Landau an Oscar for playing Bela Lugosi.
I think Murphy deserves all the credits he can get. And I thought his performance was great. I thought all the supporting characters were great, and it's so much fun.
And as he now talks about wanting to get back into stand-up comedy and that being his pursuit for 2020, you could see where a lot of that hunger came from, because he really had to be a performer, sure, on the small screen, on the screen itself within the movie, but as an MC, as a stand-up comic, playing that character.
He gets it.
Yeah.
I
think it brought those juices back.
Absolutely.
Flowing.
He captures the spirit of it, and I definitely think it's one of the best things I've seen. It's one of the best movies I've seen so far. That was like a mainstream release.
Did you see it in theaters, or did you see it actually at home?
I saw it on Netflix.
So did I.
when it came out, and I'm glad it is there. It would have been nice if I could have seen it in the theater, because there's a lot of great moments in it. But I feel like it's a great like Sunday. Suck up underneath a blanket with a loved one and laugh kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the number 4. Even though these are not ranked in no particular order, I'll talk about my number 4. So mine was a movie that I reviewed, which was produced in part by Legion M. When I interviewed Jeff Anderson, who's the president of Legion M. He turned me on to this movie called Memory: Origins of Alien, which is a documentary about the making of Alien. Which the first question I asked is, why do we need a documentary about the making of Alien? There's a lot of films about Alien. There's a lot of there's not only just documentaries but special features and YouTube videos and yada yada yada. What I thought was unique about this is it talked about some of the themes and things that were explored in the movie that you don't normally see. We've talked about Alien many times on this show, especially with Richard LeMay, who called it a perfect movie. Are you an Alien fan?
I am an Alien fan, not as much as some others. I appreciate the first and the original, and the sequel, Aliens by James Cameron, was enjoyable. But after that, they lose me a little bit, but nothing beats the original.
They talked about Dan O'Bannon, who had the original idea, and kind of the different morphs that I went through, and things that Ridley Scott did, but it wasn't sort of a paint-by-numbers documentary, which is what I liked about it. Anyway, moving on. So let's talk about your number 4 film.
Another biopic. My number 4 was Rocket Man, starring Taron Egerton, the Elton John biopic. It's a lot of fun. That's first and foremost. Obviously, the entertainment value was huge, but what I was surprised about, because Bohemian Rhapsody had just come out the year prior, and not so long, I believe Rocket Man came out around March, April, and I want to say, Bohemian Rhapsody came out about 6 months before that. So
people were comparing the two a lot.
British-born singers dealing with their issues, homosexuality being one of them, and drug addiction, and being iconic pop figures in England. But what I really enjoyed about it was you were expecting that same type of, he's a boy, he grows up, he develops interest in music, here's how he found this hit, here's how he found this hit, and so on and so forth. And what I liked was the design of the film, because it almost seemed as if a Broadway musical had been made already, and this were a film version on the Broadway musical. The performances of each of his iconic songs were done not only in stage format, but almost like a, not only Broadway, but an across the universe type of film, where the performance of the song was not because he was performing it before a live crowd, but he was performing it for the audiences in theaters, and it's how those songs reflected his life and his own internal struggles.
So it had that sort of diegetic and non-diegetic type music. So there's music that he's playing in the movie,
yes,
and then there's music that's playing for the movie, kind of thing, where they're just performing. So more of a musical vibe. That's kind of cool. I think with a lot of these, especially people that said this is Bohemian Rhapsody, but there's become this very formulaic way of the rock star biopic kind of thing, and it's gotten kind of played out.
It's a little redundant, and what I really liked about it on top of it was the fact that Taron Egerton performed all the music himself.
How was that part of it? Because Elton John's voice, you know what I mean? If you've been a human in the past 30 years, you know what Elton John sounds like.
He pulls it off extremely well. It does sound like him. He has a little bit of that grit that you hear in Elton John's voice, especially the younger years. 40 years changes your voice somewhat, and especially with the the personal addictions Elton went through, which they deal with in the movie. But I'll just put it this way. He must have done a good job, because not only did I like it, but a few weeks after that, and you can find the clip on YouTube somewhere, Taron performed with Elton John live. So,
that's cool.
So I think it's safe to say Elton approved as well.
Yeah, I'm sure he did before the movie. I'm sure he signed off on that actor.
I'm sure he gave the okay.
I don't think Elton John's the type of guy to be like, yeah, just don't worry about it. I'm sure he had strict approval over it. And the fact that Taron Egerton is also British probably helps.
And he looked like him. The look really aided
he looks
well.
like a young Elton John.
Yes.
All right, let's move on to the next film, which we both had the same one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino. I like the film a lot. I saw it in theaters. It surprised me in many ways.
Did it really?
First of all, Brad Pitt is great. I just thought, he is such a movie star, man. And I had, shades of a younger Robert Redford. And, Leonardo DiCaprio I always thought was a good actor. He's been acting ever since he was a kid. In this movie, he is so damn good.
Yes.
And Pitt is great in it. And I just thought, and their chemistry. I don't know if they had a relationship like they knew each other, but you do feel like these guys have spent a lot of time together, and that relationship to me was key to the whole film.
And while Pitt plays the stuntman to DiCaprio's leading man in the film, you could tell they played it off more as a relationship. Not that where Pitt's character was DiCaprio's lackey, but more of that we're friends, but on an employment level. And
he's sort of like a paid friend in a way.
Yes, a paid friend. And
paid drinking buddy, kind of thing.
And what I really love is how, if you contrast the two characters, or compare the two characters rather, DiCaprio has so much dialogue. It's more about what he says and how he reacts to the moment as an actor. And you look at Pitt's character, who is the stuntman to DiCaprio's in all of his works, and serves as his valet, if you will. A lot of what he does well is through reactions and subtle cues, and how he absorbs the scenery around him, and you could really tell
it's almost
that's
like a comic
place.
and straight man kind of thing.
Yes.
What I liked about it too was, okay, so this is done, I believe it's set in 1969, the film, because it's the same year as the Manson family
Yes,
murders.
It centers around Sharon Tate's murder.
So I won't give away anything in the film because the ending is bonkers. That's all I'll say about the end. The ending is bonkers in this film. But I'm a little older than you, so when I grew up, this was a known piece of history.
Yes.
And you kind of grew up knowing it, and Sharon Tate was a sort of a tragic figure, and she was married to Roman Polanski. She was killed by the Manson family, which was a cult that Charles Manson had outside of Hollywood. It helps to know this when you see the film, because there's certain aspects of it where if you know what happened historically, you're
almost waiting for them at times in the film as cues to okay, this is happening now.
Right. So if you know that stuff, I think you kind of get more out of it, but you don't have to know that stuff.
You don't, because now Tarantino, and this is not just one of the films, but he's done this in others, Inglourious Bastards being one of them, Tarantino's revisionist history.
Right.
Almost his own universe. And then if you add the Easter eggs that he provided in this film to his other films, it's like going on safari. You just have so many things to pick apart as
it's a
you're
very
taking
Tarantino movie.
Yes, it definitely is.
It might be one of the most Tarantino movies that's ever Tarantino'd its way across the screen. The other thing I loved about it too was because Tarantino has this affection for old Hollywood, and he loves old television. And there's a scene in it where you see this whole scene. Leonardo DiCaprio's character he's an actor. He's playing a part on a Western show. He's playing the bad guy, the heavy, and you see this whole sequence of him making this show.
Yeah.
And it seems only to exist for you to see it happening and to see what he goes through on it. And there's a great scene. I can't remember the actress's name, but the little girl that he's acting.
She's fantastic. I know exactly what. Yeah.
There's a wonderful scene between the two of them, and where he's kind of learning from her, and you see his vulnerability, I guess, because and you kind of learn it's even if you've been a successful actor, you're still vulnerable. You're still only as good as your next job. And he pulls that off so well, probably from all his years of being in Hollywood. There's got to be some meta-narrative going on in there as well.
His films are like Hollywood meets the Old West at this point.
Yeah.
He likes those two styles and genres.
And just being able, and I've heard other reviewers say this too, but being able to show that era of Hollywood and without a ton of CGI. There's scenes where you see people driving around Hollywood Boulevard or driving down one of the many streets in Los Angeles, which I guess if you're an LA native, you probably
understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, because we're New Yorkers, so we don't see. Well, first of all, we don't drive, but in this movie, there's a lot of driving, and you see this scenery, and it's all real.
Yeah,
it's all practical stuff, which is amazing. And it's done very, very well.
And one thing I was very curious for as well was this was his first, he did this film with Sony. This was his first film post-Weinstein. So I wanted to see how many liberties he would be given by another studio and another set of producers that he would not, that he would be normally accustomed to, under the Weinstein name.
I think at this point he can kind of do whatever he wants.
But I'm glad he has those liberties with other studios, because sometimes, he was kind of left without a choice because he had become so accustomed to the, his film home. And, I'm glad he's, been able to work outside
Well, for this
of the
film, I remember
Weinstein
hearing.
name.
I heard a lot about it in the making of in the build up to it. He actually kind of put this film out to the highest bidder. He said, "I'm going to make a movie. Which studio wants to make it?" And Sony came courting hard because they were looking for.
But I'm just glad they didn't meddle. They didn't
Yeah.
get too involved and really try to put their hands in the
It
dough.
was not an Amazing Spider-Man 2 situation.
Yes. They respected the art and let him work through it.
If only a fool would do that at this point with Tarantino. He's been so consistently good, and if you grew up watching him like I did as a young filmmaker in the '90s, he's still got it, man.
Yeah.
He's still like in. There's nobody else really that's doing what he's doing.
Well, original content, even though it's based on something, and even films like Django were based on a spaghetti western, and maybe they're not completely original, but he takes something and he'll make it his own. It's different in its own way. It may have a base, but the rest of the product is all his.
Yeah, it's totally in the best description. I wish I had thought of this, but the best description I've heard of it is Mark Bernardin, who is a film critic for the LA Times and is a TV writer and so forth. He called it hip hop filmmaking.
I like that.
Because he's sampling, and turning around original beats. Anyway, we'll move on to the next thing, but before we run out of time. So that was both our number 3. What was your number 2?
Number 2, Todd Phillips' Joker, with an amazing performance by Joaquin Phoenix. Just nice to see a character, and especially with what the reputation of the character, the Joker, in the Batman saga since Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight that won him a posthumous Academy Award. To see that character reinvented and to see an iconic character be put in a film that's completely character driven. The Joker himself doesn't really play a huge role. It really is Arthur Fleck and the personal struggles he goes to and that path into madness he's driven into, and whether that's external or internal personally, because there's a combination of both, and we could sit here and interpret the film all day long. But I think films like that are amongst the best, and not to mention highly entertaining, an outstanding score, great directing by Todd Phillips, and a masterful performance by Joaquin Phoenix.
I have yet to see this movie. I will see it at some point. My question is, a lot of people have mentioned 2 movies by Martin Scorsese. People talked about Taxi Driver. Mm-hmm. People talked about King of Comedy.
Yep.
Have you seen either of those films?
I've seen both of them, and prior to seeing this and just seeing the trailer, The King of Comedy jumped out at me immediately, not only because of the similarities in the story of the film, but once you see De Niro and that, behind the desk as this late-night Johnny Carson-esque talk show host, you cannot help but think of, his character of Rupert Pupkin and, what he did to Jerry Lewis, iconic character in The King of Comedy.
All right, so my number 2 is See You Yesterday by Stefan Bristol. Mm-hmm. He's another filmmaker who has been on the show. It's on Netflix. It's a great little film about 2 kids who invent time travel and go back in time to prevent a police shooting of one of the characters' brother.
Sounds like a great film.
It's got a lot of great themes in it. It's surprisingly fun. And colorful and light, but it covers some really heavy territory. It's something you don't see every day. It's set here in Brooklyn. It's very, very Brooklyn. Like, I feel like this movie happened down the street from where I live. So I really liked a lot about that. For more, you can check out the episode with Stefan Bristol. He's a lovely guy and a wonderful upcoming filmmaker. He's a protege of Spike Lee. Worked with Spike on BlacKkKlansman as his assistant, was taught by Spike in school, and you can see a lot of the Spike influence, but I think he's really going to make a name for himself, which is great. We got to move along because we're running out of time, so I'll talk about my number 1. You can talk about your number 1. We'll do that briefly, but for me it was, and I've talked about it a bunch on the show, I had the director Max Powers on, Don't Be Nice, the documentary about the Bowery Poetry Slam team going to finals. It's a great documentary, highly recommended. I wrote the best review a movie has ever gotten on it. So if you want to know more about it, read the review or watch the episode with Max Powers. But tremendous movie, gets you the feels, as the kids say, in all the right places. A really well done feature documentary. Anyway, moving on. What was your last film?
My last film was The Lighthouse. Just to see an original film, very few actors, actually, 2 total, 3 credited, because there's a smaller scene with someone else. Another character-driven film, but it's almost like Madness Tennis in the sense of Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson's characters go back and forth so much. And one, it's like a wave of emotion between the two, and it's almost to see which character can top the other and become more mad and become more of a psychopath in their own right. And the elements internally and existentially that lead them down that path. I found it to be, despite being very dark, very entertaining. Another great score, another great directorial performance, and just one of those films that I think will go down, at least be shown in film classes for a very long time.
And this is the director of The Witch.
Yes,
which I've heard great things about as well. I haven't seen it, but it looks like an interesting film. I read your review as well. I think maybe want to see the picture. With the exception of maybe like Joker and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like a lot of these are not mainstream type pictures.
No.
The Lighthouse is not, you're not
it's a
bringing
Spirit Award contender right now.
you're not bringing that. You're not bringing the whole family to see this one kind of thing. But it's great that it exists, and it's great that it's getting play. Pattinson and Willem Dafoe are really strong actors. I'm glad. It's great to see like a two-hander type picture exists. The whole movie's in black and white. And
very Hitchcockian, so it feels like you're watching something from Alfred back in the 1950s, 60s.
Very cool, very cool. All right, I'm going to wrap it up in a second, but for those who might be wondering where they can see more of you and the stuff that you put out there, where can we find you on the web?
Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EJ Argenio. 2 letters, E and J, that's my first name. Argenio, Argenio. You can find me under all platforms under that name.
I'm going to wrap up. Thanks again for coming. Thank you for taking this trip down the rabbit hole. For more episodes, you can find us on NoRushForTheWeekendPodcast.com. All of our content and reviews are there as well, some written by me, some written by EJ. And if you're a filmmaker and would like your film reviewed, send us an email, info@BehindTheRabbitProductions, with the subject line, Review My Movie. We'll take a look at it. It has to be a feature film, and it has to be somewhere in wide release where we can actually see it. You can send us a screener there as well. We'll check it out. For Behind the Rabbit Productions, I'm Jason Godbey. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.